I did come up here originally to introduce Bruce Bawer, who is, due to a family emergency, not going to be present. So they've asked me to extend my remarks, which is always a dangerous thing to ask of me. So instead, I'm going to give you just a brief bit of what I was going to say about Bruce Bawer, because I think his voice deserves to be heard here today. You know, sometime in the early part of the last century, we were told that pollution was the price of progress. If you liked all those shiny new items, those new jobs, the economic security that came with industry, you just had to learn to live with pollution. It wasn't the goal of industrialization to have pollution. It was a byproduct, but it was seen as a byproduct that could never be gotten rid of. And for a while, we lived in this hard bargain. We had industrial growth and we had pollution. But after a while, we started to choke on its noxious dust, and we demanded progress without pollution. Now today we have a kind of moral pollution, a self-censorship and an actual censorship in too many countries. And that censorship is alive and well even in the developed world, even in the North America or Western Europe. And that's actually the subject of Bruce's great works, which I'll get to in a moment. But is censorship the price of social peace? That's really the question that Bruce Bawer is trying to put before us today. That if we fail to silence ourselves and to silence other people with unpopular opinions, then the result will be blood. It will be violence. You know, Bruce writes primarily about Islamic intolerance, that the new immigrants who fled intolerance in their native lands and came to the developed world and brought intolerance with them and an unwillingness to accept contrary points of view, contrary to their religion or to their culture. We also have a native intolerance, which we don't talk about very often, but it does come out when people criticize the state or criticize the academic consensus on any number of subjects. And so the question is, how long can we live in exchange for this wonderful thing, which is social tolerance, with this pollution of censorship and self-censorship, this dreadful, fearful conformity that is descending upon us in Western Europe and in the United States, and indeed across the developed world. Now, if you think I'm exaggerating the case, consider the case of, I'm probably going to butcher his name, but Vebjørn Selbekk. He ran the Danish cartoons in a small Norwegian newspaper. It didn't matter that he'd run the other newspapers, including Aftenposten, which is one of the larger papers here, ran the cartoons. That's censors pick on the weak. It's a small circulation paper, 4,000, I believe, read the thing on a daily basis. And he was forced to apologize by the government of Norway. So there he was, after 2 weeks of defying world pressure, of insisting on his rights for free speech. There was a Norwegian citizen who broke no law, apologizing publicly and asking forgiveness of the imams who were put together by ministers of the Norwegian state. So it does happen here. It does happen in the developed world. And these are the kinds of things that Bruce has been calling to our attention. This panel is called the Group of Innovators. And sometimes innovation is just pointedly pointing out what's right in front of us. And that's what Bruce Bawer has done in his books, While Europe Slept, and his latest book, Surrender, which I just read yesterday, and I recommend it to all of you. But let's go back to pollution for a moment. Pollution harmed all of us, but it harmed some people more severely than others. It harmed the young and the very old, those in ill health. They suffered more from pollution. We all suffered, but they suffered more than the average. Now, if you look at censorship and self-censorship, this dreadful conformity that's descending, you'll see that there are some people who suffer more than others. We all are at a loss. We've all been subtracted from, but others find that they have shrank more, they've lost more, and particularly the innovators, the scholar with a new research program, the student with a fresh question, the musician who wants to do something different, the writer with an alternative point of view. And we haven't really thought enough about the value of these uncomfortable, unusual individuals who challenge us. But if we do start to recognize them and think about them, we'll realize that this censorship is another kind of pollution. And isn't it time that we demanded some kind of social peace without censorship, just as we once demanded it of industrial progress without pollution? It is possible to have peace. It is possible in a multicultural society for people to get along if they begin by respecting the rights of other people to say things with which they disagree. Free speech is not about silencing those who disagree with you, but giving them a respectful hearing and then challenging them in nonviolent words. We had a consensus like that in the developed world for more than a century, and we're losing it just very recently. It wouldn't take very much to go back. But instead, we get an ever-thickening culture smog, a dreadful conformity that can't see a way out. It's like those people who insisted that there's really nothing we can do. If we like the benefits of the factory, we can never clean the air. But everyone in this room, in one way or another, is about clearing the air of that culture smog. Now, what must we do? You know, in Bruce's books, Surrender, his most recent book, he doesn't lay out a program, an action agenda, if you will, for changing the world. But I'd like to suggest a few things. First of all, I think we need more conferences like this. When like minds get together and people realize that they're not alone, they become braver. And yes, to use a word, they do become more innovative. We also need to think about awards, prizes, not necessarily on the scale of the Nobel Prize, but something to recognize great examples of free speech. It doesn't matter whether we agree with it. In fact, it's probably better if we don't. But we need to highlight those lonely individuals, those innovators out on the edge of opinion on whatever side of the spectrum you prefer, and give them the kind of recognition they deserve for that kind of heroic activity. But we need to do more than just have conferences and give awards. We also need to have a voice. It's very easy to calmly lament in your living room, oh, it's sad what's happening to free speech. Oh, it's terrible how the cartoonists don't draw certain items because they're afraid of angry mobs, or that they don't lampoon certain politicians because that's just not done. But every one of us, through our organizations and through our individual effort, have to stand up. If there's an army of us, and armies always begin small, but they grow, ultimately free speech can be defended. But it depends on the individual action of everyone beginning in this room, and then extending outward from this room. So I'd urge you to start by reading Bruce Bawer's Surrender, but then think next about what you can do, because action without ideas is lifeless.